I'm quilting my Honeybloom quilt from Primitive Gatherings. Now, this isn't Primitive Gatherings fabric, it is Honeybloom fabric from Three Sisters from Moda. But the pattern is called Honeybloom, and Lisa from Primitive Gatherings designed this to use charm packs of the Honeybloom fabric. I don't often jump at buying the kit just like that. I will subscribe, I'll get the patterns, but this quilt was just magical and I had to buy the kit right away, and I'm excited to be finally quilting it. So it just has a lovely garden feel, and I want to put some effort into the quilting of this because I want to spend some time touching this fabric. So this is going to be custom quilted. And what I've decided to do in the sashings is to stitch ribbon candy because I love ribbon candy. And here's one of the times when I will stitch ribbon candy free motion, hand guided, which the way I always do it, but I often say it's okay to use a stencil. Well, this is a size that one of my stencils doesn't come in, because we have like a 1-inch stencil, a 1.5, a 2, a 2.5, and I think this is like 1 3/4 inches or something like that. So I don't have a stencil that fits that, and it's worthwhile learning how to stitch ribbon candy for cases just like this. Then what I'm going to do in ribbon candy is I'm going to stitch big continuous curve here, which is a curve from corner to corner to corner to corner, and little continuous curve here. Now that I'm not going to do free motion, I'm going to do that with quilting with a ruler against the foot of my machine. Now I have a ruler foot on this machine, and this machine uses 1/4 inch machine quilting rulers. Check with your machine manufacturer to see what foot you need and what ruler your machine uses, because you can break your machine if you use the wrong foot and or the wrong needle. I mean the wrong ruler. Be sure to have the right materials. If you've never quilted with rulers before, I highly recommend taking my machine quilting with rulers class at Annie's Attic. It's on sale big time today, right now, the day I'm filming this. So I'll have a link in the description. So the rulers that I'm using to quilt this quilt, I'm using an arc ruler from Handi Quilter. Sorry, a slice. It's called a slice template. And this is a 2 1/4 inch slice template. And I have ruler grip on the back. It's called Handi Grip. Because if I put the ruler on the quilt, the ruler will move the quilt. If I put the ruler on the quilt without grip, the ruler will slide over the quilt. I need the ruler to stay with the quilt and actually push the quilt. So Handi Grip, pretty important. You can get it online or get it at your local Handi Quilter retailer. I don't get paid whether you buy this or not. I just really like the product. Then one of my absolute favorite rulers is the multi-clamshell ruler. It is a 1.5, 2, 3, and 4-inch clamshell. I'm using the 3-inch clamshell on this. So I am just using the very tip of this curve. I'm not using the tip of the 2-inch curve because it would be really deep. I can't use the 1.5 because it's smaller, and if I use the 4-inch, it's going to be really flat. So I'm going to show you how I go through, and I'm going to quilt an entire column of this, going from top to bottom of the quilt, and then move over, go from top to bottom of the quilt, then move over, go from top to bottom of the quilt. I have my machine threaded with a 50 weight cream variegated cotton from Wonderful. It's called Tutti. The color is lamb, and I'm using an 80 weight polyester in the bobbin. It is called Antique White. I like the thinner bobbin thread because it makes a great stitch on the back, and the bobbin lasts longer. It gets more yardage on the bobbin. And then I'm using my Batt Scooters, because they help me push my quilt. My hands get tired, that I have to really try to grip it harder, that I can hold on to the Batt scooter and the scooter will push the quilt. And when I'm using the ruler, I hold on to the ruler with one hand, scooter on the other, or switch, depending on which hand I'm holding with. So here we go. To get started, I'm holding my tail, needle down, needle up, pull up my bobbin thread so they're both in my hand. Take a couple small stitches to make a knot there. Now I'm going to bring my template right next to where the foot is And I'm positioning it at the bottom so there is a 1/4 inch between where the ruler is and where that seam is. That will allow my foot to come through and my needle to end up in that corner. So I'm going to stitch the first line. I can now reach up and cut the thread. Move the ruler, and now I can hold the ruler with both hands here and push the quilt with just both hands, no Batt Scooters. Position it again against the foot, a 1/4 inch away from where I want to end. Batt Scooter. And then I put the ruler back on the last curve. And that one is done. I can stitch that free motion, but I get kind of wiggly when it's this large, so I do like for the larger continuous curves to use a ruler. And the cool thing about these slice templates is that they're not a whole circle. I have a pretty big opening on my sewing machine here, so if I did have a full circle here, it probably would fit. But if you're working with a smaller opening on your machine, you don't have to have all of that space for a large template when you just need a curve. So I really do like the slices. I think they work really well for the smaller opening machines. So now, while my needle is still in place, I'm going to stitch ribbon candy down the sashing. If you want to know more about stitching ribbon candy, free motion, check out my first steps to free motion quilting class. I'll throw a link in the description. So now I'm at my cornerstone here and I want to stitch continuous curve. I'm going to grab my multi-clamshell template and I'm going to do the same thing, placing it behind the machine, touching the foot and a 1/4 inch away from where I want to end. Move to the left. Move to the bottom. Move to the side. And now I'm going to stitch ribbon candy in the sashing. Now I just finished the continuous curve, my needle's in this corner, but the next sashing I need to stitch is over here. So I'm going to turn this slice template upside down and use it to stitch straight across the seam line. And then I'm in position to stitch down the sashing. I could have made a knot, then moved over and made a knot, but for me, I was happier doing stitch in the ditch. You do whatever works best for you. Now I'm going to do the cornerstone, the sashing, the large continuous curve, stitch in the ditch, sashing. And I'm going to continue doing that all the way down this column till all 11 big blocks are done and I've hit the bottom border. So I finished stitching an entire column, work my way back up to the top, move over to the next column, and repeat until all of the blocks, sashings, and cornerstones are done. I want to quilt feathers in the border of this quilt, and I want to show you how I mark for feathers to make them even and fit in any size quilt. The first thing I did is figured out how wide this border is. So I grabbed my ruler, and this border looks like 5.5 inches. So I typically mark the middle of the border. I took a blue marker. I need a new blue marker. Mine's pretty faint, so sorry it's not showing up. But I drew one at 2.5 inches. I think 2 3/4 would have been perfectly in half, but you can put the line wherever you want. That just means there'll be more open feathers on the outside and smaller feathers on the inside. The closer the line is to the quilt, that's where the smaller feathers are going to be, and the larger size is going to be larger feathers. So that's one thing I did. The next thing I did was I figured out what size I want my corners, because corners are where you can really see the continuous feathers. So I had this 7-inch half-circle tool sitting next to my machine, and I said, well, let's try that one. So I put that in the corner, and when I say in the corner, I put the center of the circle at the edge of the border. So this is where the quilt is. This is a block. And then I see that it goes near to that 2.5 inch mark. So that looks good. I'm going to take that same marker and I'm going to just make a little teeny tiny mark 1/4 inch away from where the ruler is, where it crosses that line, because that's where that's where I'll need to pick up stitching for the corner, for the curve at the corner. Then I went back into the middle of the quilt and I made a line. So actually it's really faint. I'm having trouble. There it is. So I have a line here that's the middle of the border and the middle of the border. So there's a nice X here. And I know that I'm going to want either the top edge of one of my curves or the bottom edge of one of my curves to be right on that line. And so now it's time to put the wave in. So I have a Handi Gadgets, Handi Quilter Wave C ruler. And it's really scratched up because I've traveled with it a lot. It is 8 by 1.5 inches. 8 inches long, 1.5 inches deep. And I just grabbed that out and I said, yeah, that looks pretty good. And the reason I know that I like it, it's about the same curve as my 7-inch ruler. You can see they kind of fit together here. So I know that it's not going to be a big curve and then go to something flat, or it's going to be a little curve and go to something really deep. They will smoothly transition from one to another. I've already stitched feathers around this corner, and I want to stitch my spine first. So I'm going to put my needle back in. There, so I made a knot, and I have my ruler. So with my ruler, I want to find where the halfway part of this curve is. And this line here is marked on the ruler. But my ruler's really scratched, and my eyesight's really bad, and the line isn't very strong to start with. So I put some painter's tape on here, and I know that I will line this line up with my drawn line on my quilt. So it's going to be the top of the tape with the drawn line. Now I went through and marked this out on my quilt, just with a little tick mark here and there. And what I realized is this almost fits. So I need to make a short curve. I can't use the whole curve. It's not the right number of inches. So what I'm going to do is stitch down to the center and pause and slide the ruler up, keeping that halfway, keeping my line on the line. I'm going to stitch up to the end and go not quite to the end. So now I'm going to start and re-line up my ruler, and I'm going to stitch the next curve down to the bottom, stop and slide, up to the top, and don't quite finish. Because I need to lose about 1/4 inch on each one of these. And now I can see down here my halfway mark, and that's where I can make my final adjustments. So I need to lose a little more space because I want the middle to land exactly in the middle. Go down, slide, stop at the halfway mark. Go down, slide, Now I'm at that little mark I made to show where my circle ends at the corner, and I am nailed it. So I'm lining everything on the line, and I want to stitch so that I stop right at the intersection of where that little hash mark is so that I can change rulers. Now I can come in with my 7-inch circle put the corner on the corner, and oh look, it lined up perfectly with my foot. I can now stitch around that. And around. And then I can turn the quilt, stitch the third, because my corners of my quilt are 3/4 of a circle. So I can stitch another 1/4 of a circle here. And then I can continue with my markings, stitch all the way down, and finish all the ruler work, or I can do one border at a time. But that's how I get to match up. There's some fudging. If I'm designing a quilt, I often design a quilt so that the ruler and the math and it all works. I didn't design this quilt, and this quilt was designed by Lisa Bongean, and it's gorgeous and it's perfect just the way it is. So I need to find a way to make the feathers fit a quilt that I didn't design. That's how I do it. Now that I have the spine stitched, it's time to come back in and stitch feathers. Now, I talk a lot about feathers and how to make this type of flexible feather in my Free-Motion feather class online. I'll put a link around this video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going, like all feathers, I go up a ski slope, around a circle, and come back to the line. And I'm going to stitch the inside first. So I'm reattaching the thread where I left off. I'm going to stitch along the previous curve, up around a half circle, and hold the curve back to the line. Now, as I talk about in my feather class, this type of feather presents a problem when you get on an inside curve, on a concave curve, that there's not enough room to make all your feathers down here and have them not overlap up here. So what I'm going to do is make about 3 feathers, a short, a medium, and a long. And then I'm going to do that again, maybe 4 feathers this time. There's no magic to it, it's just how I do it. And once I've finished those short feathers, now I'm back to the convex part of the feather and can stitch them as normal. And now it's time for the short, medium, and long feathers. I'll continue that all the way around the quilt. To finish the feathers in this border, I have now stitched, I basted the edge of the quilt down, and then I put some 1/4 inch tape along the side to make sure that I have area to bind my quilt without binding off the tips of my feathers. So I'm going to pick up and stitch the other side the same way. So I'm continuing with short feathers, long feathers on the inside curve, and doing regular feathers on the outside curves.